And the first question comes from Said Hassan at Concordia University in Montreal. Said asks, if the debt can be shared with future generations, why would not the risk premium tend to be negligible so long as the number of participating generations can be large?
Exactly, he's right. And in our usual overlapping generation models, technically we have a succession, infinite succession of generations, right? And we can just leave it to them. The problem is that the market might not agree with you. The market might think that, well, who knows whether a successive generation will be willing to pay the taxes. We want to see some willingness today that we can get our money back. And if you are in that kind of situation, when you have a high debt level, you can be in a very tight spot.
So another question that's come in for you, and it kind of relates to the tight spot issue, is that an anonymous attendee is asking, is one conclusion of your presentation that governments should implement fiscal consolidation measures as they did during the euro area debt crisis in between 2010 and 2012, and didn't they do a lot of harm in the affected countries?
Okay, that is a very long discussion. I know that everybody just assumes that the consolidation of public finances after the financial crisis in Europe was a mistake. I would submit that this is not a foregone conclusion. But my concern is not really about what you should do this year, but my concern is more saying we start now with we start today with a much higher debt level than before. And we also have a feeling that maybe we should think that uncertainty is higher than we thought in 2019. And this suggests to me that the debt levels we thought were prudent in 2019 should now be lower. And we are starting with higher debt levels. So that means that over the medium term, we should think about how we can reduce the debt levels because otherwise the next one-in-a-generation crisis could really bring us in a very tight spot very soon.
A question from Robin, and I'm hoping that is the full name there. Robin's asking, is it not unbalanced of you to look at the bigger dangers of fat-tail risks compared to those from government debt? From Robin Pope.
I don't really know how to answer that. There's always a question, is there useful expenditure by the government? Should it not invest more? And who can be against more government investment? Nobody, right? But that's not my point. Maybe we should double our government investment. I'm not against that. But the question is whether we need to finance it via debt. I think Olivier also talked about this earlier this morning. If there's useful government debt and if it actually brings returns, then actually we have the two sides of the balance sheet and it shouldn't be such a big problem. I'm talking more about debt which arises through transfers, for example, transfer payments, of which we have seen, I think, 15% of GDP in the United States this year, and a lot. And the question is whether when you accumulate more and more of this kind of debt, which doesn't have its counterpart in assets or in higher economic activity, then I think you have a problem.
And your last question before we let you go, Daniel, is from Jürgen Mathis from the German Economic Institute. He's asking, the relevant interest rate for debt service depends on the maturity structure of debt. How can this be factored in Daniel's calculations?
Well, that's an important factor. Again, if you have, let's say if you had only consols, right? So debt which never comes due, then it wouldn't really matter, right? But governments don't issue many consols because they cost more and they have to pay an insurance premium. It seems to me today that government wants, but if, sorry, let me say the other way. If all your debt is very short term, then of course you can get a crisis much more quickly. So the question is quite justified. The extent to which you are subject to shocks depends a lot on the maturity of the debt. The longer it is, the better. But we also know that today, actually, governments issue medium-term debt, 7 to 10 years. So they have some protection. A one-year shock shouldn't be deadly. But a shock which lasts several years could create some problems. But at the same time, central banks buy lots of government debt. And this means that actually they substitute long-term government which they're buying, long-term government debt which they're buying with very short-term obligations of the central bank. And that's again part of the government. So actually, and what I'm concerned about is that the structure of government debt is actually made more short-term de facto these days. And that increases the danger, especially if in Europe, if the ECB were to increase its interest rates, for example, because inflation increases, then the cost of government debt will increase. And I could see governments protesting against that, right? Especially those with high debt. Mm-hmm. And we come back to some of the problems which I mentioned earlier. So yes, in theory, very long-term debt protects you. De facto, governments are unwilling to pay the premium.
I know we have quite a few more questions left, but unfortunately we have run out of time with you, Daniel. Thank you so very much for that analysis. We'll see how everybody reacts in terms of the two sides of the coin and where they come out at towards the end of the day. But thank you to you for your presentation, and thank you to all of your questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't take all of them, but we have to move on now because Daniel has essentially now laid the groundwork for our thinking going into our session about governance and macroeconomic policy in the European Monetary Union. So do stick around for that plenary session that's coming up. But those of you watching our live stream, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. We hope that between Daniel, Olivier, and also our panel this afternoon, you have some clarity of thought as we look at fiscal policy and recovery in the European Union.